In this video, we'll be looking at the various types of cell references in Microsoft Excel. We have the relative reference, the absolute reference, and the mixed reference. What a cell reference means in Excel is that the name or the value or the address of a cell. So if I click on a cell right here, it means that the cell reference of this active cell is L1. And if I say that I click on here and I say what is the cell reference for the active cell here, the cell reference is the name of the cell, which is N2. Now remember that the name of a cell is dependent on the corresponding column and the row. So it means that the intersection between a column and a row gives a cell. And then the name of the cell is the column label and the row label. So it means that this cell is in column L and in row 2, meaning L2. If I click on here, this cell is in column J and in row 2, we give us the name of the cell J2. A relative cell reference will change when referenced by a formula. An absolute cell reference means that the value of the cell that is referenced by a formula will remain constant. The mixed reference means that in a formula, you can use both of them. Using the multiplication table as an example to better illustrate the relative, the absolute, and the mixed reference, we have the rows as 1 to 12, and then we have the column 1 to 12, we have the rows 1 to 12. So row 5 has the number 1 to 12. Column A has the numbers 1 to 12. So right now we want to get the multiplication of the rows times the column. So for instance, in this cell value here, what I want to achieve here is I want to multiply 1 times 1 to give me the result. So I'll do this by saying equals to this value times the value of this cell, which gives me 1. Now what I want to do here is I want to drag down this formula so that by the time I drag down, I want to have 12 multiplied by 1 to give me 12, right? And I want to have 8 multiplied by 1 to give me 8. So I want the values in this cell ranges to be multiplied by the value in B5. So it means that this value in B5 should not change if I drag down this formula. But let's see what happens. If I drag down, I have the values changing. So if I click on B17, the aim of this, the value that should be in B17 should be 12 multiplied by 1, and the result should be 12. But what's happening? Why do we have this wrong figure? It means that we are multiplying A17, which is 12, which is fine, okay? But what we want to multiply A17 by should be B5, not B16, because this value as we drag down is changing. Because we drag down the formulas, this cell reference, we have the relative cell references here. So A6 is a relative cell reference, while B5 is also a relative cell reference. Now what do we need to do to make this achieve the result we want? So we need to make B5 a constant cell so that the value will not change, and to do that, this cell will have to have an absolute reference. All I need to do is append a $sign in the front of the reference cell. So I append a $sign by using my shift key on my keyboard and shift 4, and then I have an absolute B5 reference. But remember that the cell name is determined by the column and the rows. In referencing, you can make the column relative or absolute, and then you can also make the row relative or absolute reference. So for instance, what we've done here is we've made the column B an absolute reference, and then the row 5 is relative reference. Column B is absolute reference, meaning the value in column B will remain constant. It will not change even if we drag the formulas to different columns. So for instance, if I drag the formula down here and I click on this formula, what happens? Column B remains constant. It doesn't change. What if I drag down here? Column B does what? Remains constant. It's not changing even though we are in column D. So what we need to do is not what we are doing right now. So I'll just undo all this. If I drag down, I haven't made column B an absolute reference, the formula is still not changing. The result is still not changing. But what we need to do in actual sense is also make the column 5 an absolute reference. And then if I click on enter, this cell B5, the column is constant and the cell is constant, so it will be fixed. The value in this cell will be fixed all through the formula. So if I do this and drag down the formula, what happens? Now we have the fine figure. So if I click in here, I have 12 multiplied by B5, which is 12. If I go to, I have A12 multiplied by B5. So I've made B5 a complete constant or fixed cell reference. So I've absolutely referenced B5 while I have A6 as a relative reference. So it means that the formula right here is called a mixed referencing format because we've used both the relative reference for A6 without the dollar appended sign, and then we've used B5 as an absolute reference with the dollar appended to the column and also to the row. Now we want to move on to the next spread. We want to have 1 multiplied by 2 to give us 2, right? 2 multiplied by 2 to give us this value. 3 multiplied by 2 to give us this value. It means this cell value here should be absolute. It should not change just like this one. So what we need to do here is we can copy this formula and paste the formula here. So I copied the formula using Ctrl C and I paste the formula using Ctrl V on my keyboard. Right now, what we want to do is instead of B5, I want to change it to the column, which is C. So let's click on here. So this cell value should have a name of C5. So I'm going to say C5 instead of B5. Now something is happening. So if I drag down here, I'm having this value. So it's saying B6 multiplied by C5, which is wrong. The result is correct because we have the same numbers in the column here. 1 to 12, 1 to 12. That's why we have a correct values here. If we want to know the value is wrong, we should copy the formula and put it here and then change this to D to reference D5. So if I take it down, you will see that the values are wrong because what we want to achieve here is 1 multiplied by 3 should give us 3. 2 multiplied by 3 should give us 6. So see what's happening here. It's multiplying C times D5. Why is that happening? Because we copied this formula. Here it is having A6, but because we copied the formula here, so the column will change. The column A will change to column B as we are moving the formula to the right hand side. So if I copy the formula here, instead of C6, if I copy it here, it gives us D6. As you can see, because we have made the reference to be relative, so it can change as we copy the formula into another cell or into another column. So what we need to do here, I'll just undo all this. And then I go back to this value. Why? Because I want to make column A constant, but the row value should change as we drag down. So how do I do that? I need to append a dollar sign to column A by making it an absolute reference. So and then I drag down. Right now I can copy this value, paste it here, drag down. Okay, before I drag down, I need to change the value of B because I want to multiply 1 times 2 and the 2 is in cell C5. So I need to change this to C5. Instead of manually changing the column label while we drag the formula to the right, we can update the formula from the B column, from the root formula. So where is the root formula? The root formula is coming from the B column. So instead of fixing or making B column constant, all we need to do is remove the dollar sign so that as we drag to the right, the column label will change accordingly. Only row 5 will be fixed, but the column will change. So I'm going to click enter here and then I'll drag down this formula, and then from here I can drag to the right hand side to fill up the remaining cell, and I should have my formula updated automatically. So if I click onto any of this column, I'll have F5 instead of manually changing B to F. I have the column changing and then I have the rows changing as we drag down, but then the row 5 is fixed while column A as well is fixed. Now as you can see here, I have the correct multiplication table from 1 to 12. So to just do a random check if the formulas are actually correct, so I click on this formula. So I have 144. It means 12 multiplied by 12 gives me what? 144. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. I'll check another one. 10 multiplied by 12 will give me what? 120. Is that correct? Absolutely. If I do this one here, 9 multiplied by 10 will give me 90. Is that correct? Yes, it's correct. And that's it about relative reference, absolute reference, and mixed referencing in Microsoft Excel. In future video, you'll see more about how to use the name ranges in Microsoft Excel, okay, using the cell references and the table references.